When 27-year-old literature graduate student Maya Chen's desperate search for a missing first edition book in her recently inherited bookstore led her to discover that an entire wall of shelves could slide away, she uncovered a hidden room containing classified CIA operation files worth $15 million and documentation of covert missions spanning for decades. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Columbia University's Butler Library as Maya Chen carefully turned the pages of a 1962 State Department memorandum, her latex gloves protecting the delicate paper from the oils on her fingertips. At 27, Maya possessed a rare combination of academic brilliance and practical expertise that had made her one of the most promising doctoral candidates in Columbia's Comparative Literature program. Her dissertation advisor, Professor Jonathan Weiss, often remarked that Maya could identify the provenance of a government document by examining the paper quality, typewriter font, and bureaucratic language patterns with an accuracy that rivaled forensic document examiners. Maya's specialization in Cold War era intelligence literature had begun almost by accident during her undergraduate years at Georgetown University. While researching a paper on post-war American fiction, she had stumbled upon references to a network of writers and intellectuals who had worked with the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom during the 1950s and 1960s. What started as a footnote in a literature paper had evolved into a master's thesis, and eventually into doctoral research that was breaking new ground in understanding how intelligence agencies had used literary networks to advance American interests during the Cold War. Her academic credentials were impressive by any standard. Maya had graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown with a double major in English literature and international relations. Her undergraduate thesis, The Pen as Sword, CIA Literary Programs during the Cultural Cold War, had won the university's highest honor for undergraduate research and had been published in a respected academic journal while she was still in college. The thesis had examined how the CIA had secretly funded literary magazines, book publishers, and cultural organizations to promote American intellectual influence in Europe and developing nations. During her master's program at Columbia, Maya had gained access to previously classified documents through Freedom of Information Act requests and academic partnerships with government archives. Her master's thesis, Invisible Ink: How Intelligence Agencies Shaped Literary Publishing from 1945 to 1975, had documented the extent to which American and British intelligence services had influenced the publication and distribution of books, magazines, and intellectual journals during the height of the Cold War. But Maya's expertise extended far beyond academic research. She had spent her summers working at some of New York's most prestigious rare book dealers and auction houses, learning the practical skills of bibliographic authentication that no classroom could teach. At the Strand Bookstore, she had worked under the legendary book scout Marcus Weinstein, who had taught her to spot first editions, identify printing errors that made books valuable, and recognize the subtle signs of forgery that could fool casual collectors. Her summer internship at Sotheby's auction house had provided exposure to the high-stakes world of rare manuscript sales, where Maya had learned to research provenance, authenticate documents, and evaluate the market value of historical papers. She had been present when Sotheby's had sold a collection of Ernest Hemingway's personal correspondence for $2.4 million. Meant she had helped authenticate letters that revealed previously unknown details about Hemingway's relationship with the OSS, the World War II predecessor to the CIA. Maya's work at Christie's during her second summer had focused specifically on government documents and intelligence-related. Under the supervision of Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Christie's leading expert in historical manuscripts, Maya had learned to identify authentic CIA documents, distinguish between different classification levels, and understand the bureaucratic systems that intelligence agencies use to create, distribute, and store sensitive materials. The practical experience had taught Maya to read documents not just for their content, but for the story told by their physical characteristics. She could determine the approximate date of a CIA document by examining the letterhead design, paper quality, and typewriter characteristics. She could identify whether a document had been created at CIA headquarters in Langley or at a field station by recognizing subtle differences in formatting and administrative procedures. Maya's knowledge of intelligence history was encyclopedic and constantly expanding. She had read every major book about the CIA, from academic histories to memoirs by former officers. She could recite the operational code names of dozens of Cold War missions: OGS in Iran, PubSucks in Guatemala, Chaos for domestic surveillance, Mockingbird for media manipulation. She understood the organizational structure of intelligence agencies, the methods they used to compartmentalize information, and the ways they had adapted their operations to changing political and technological circumstances. Her academic advisor, Professor Weiss, had often remarked that Maya seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how intelligence agencies operated. She could read between the lines of official documents to identify information that had been redacted or omitted, and she had developed theories about CIA operations that later proved accurate when additional documents were declassified. Her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources and identify patterns that others missed had made her research invaluable to other scholars studying intelligence history. Maya's personal interest in intelligence topics had been sparked by family stories about her grandfather, Thomas Chen, who had worked as a translator for the Army during World War II and the early Cold War period. Thomas had been fluent in Mandarin, Russian, and German, and family stories suggested that his work had involved more than simple translation services. Thomas had died when Maya was 12, but she remembered his vast personal library and his habit of reading newspapers in multiple languages while taking careful notes in a leather-bound journal. The connection between Maya's family history and her academic interests had deepened when she began studying her great-aunt Eleanor Chen, her grandfather's younger sister. Eleanor had always been the mysterious figure in the Chen family, unmarried, well-traveled, and possessed of knowledge and resources that seemed to exceed what a bookstore owner should reasonably have. Maya's parents had often wondered aloud how Eleanor could afford to travel to Europe several times a year and maintain a valuable collection of rare books on a bookstore owner's income. Eleanor Chen had owned the Midnight Scholar bookstore in Georgetown for over 40 years, and Maya had spent countless childhood summers working in the store, learning to catalog books, research their provenance, and understand the complex market for rare and unusual publications. Eleanor had been an extraordinary teacher, possessing an almost supernatural ability to locate rare books that other dealers couldn't find, and to authenticate manuscripts that stumped other experts. The Midnight Scholar occupied a narrow 3-story brownstone at 1247 Wisconsin Avenue, in the heart of Georgetown's historic district. The building had been constructed in 1952, and Eleanor had purchased it in 1983 when the previous owner, an elderly man named William Hartley, had decided to sell. Eleanor had paid cash for the building, a transaction that had surprised Maya's parents given that Eleanor had never seemed particularly wealthy. The bookstore itself was a maze of floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with an eclectic collection that ranged from rare first editions worth thousands of dollars to government surplus manuals that Eleanor somehow acquired through channels she never fully explained. The store's inventory included an unusually large collection of books related to intelligence, military history, and international relations, along with technical manuals, language instruction books, and foreign publications that weren't available. In most American bookstores, Eleanor's customers were as eclectic as her inventory. The store attracted Georgetown University professors, Smithsonian researchers, and foreign diplomats posted to Washington. Maya had often noticed that many customers seemed to know exactly what they wanted and where Eleanor would have shelved it, suggesting relationships that went beyond casual book browsing. Some customers spoke to Eleanor in foreign languages, and Maya had overheard conversations that seemed to involve more than book purchases. The store's location in Georgetown was strategically significant for anyone interested in intelligence history. The neighborhood was home to Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, which had produced many CIA officers and diplomats. Many of Washington's intelligence community lived in Georgetown. The area's restaurants and bars were known as informal meeting places for government officials and foreign intelligence operatives. Eleanor herself had been an enigmatic figure whose background seemed more complex than a typical bookstore owner's. Born in 1935, she had graduated from Radcliffe College in 1957 with a degree in European history. She spoke fluent Russian, French, and German, and claimed to have lived in Berlin during the 1960s, though she was always vague about the specific nature of her work there. She had never married, had no children, and rarely spoke about her past in any detail, as childhood memories of Eleanor included impressions of a woman who seemed to know more about world events than she revealed through normal conversation. Eleanor could discuss the details of European politics, the intricacies of international trade, and the personalities of foreign leaders with an expertise that seemed to come from personal experience rather than just reading. She had a habit of receiving phone calls in foreign languages and maintaining correspondence with people around the world whose names and affiliations she never explained to family members. The Midnight Scholar's inventory reflected Eleanor's international connections and mysterious expertise. The store contained books in over a dozen languages, including technical manuals and government publications that weren't available through normal book trade channels. Eleanor had somehow acquired copies of State Department publications, military training manuals, and foreign government documents that other dealers couldn't obtain. Maya had always been fascinated by Eleanor's ability to authenticate documents and manuscripts that stumped other experts. Eleanor could examine a document and immediately identify its approximate date, origin, and authenticity using methods that seemed to combine academic knowledge with practical experience that she never fully explained. She had helped several university researchers authenticate historical documents, and her opinions were respected by scholars and collectors throughout the Washington area. When Eleanor passed away unexpectedly at age 88 in September 2024, Maya was completing the final year of her doctoral program and preparing to defend her dissertation in the spring. Eleanor's death had been sudden, a heart attack while she was working alone in the bookstore on a Sunday evening. Maya's parents had received the call from Eleanor's attorney, James Richardson, who informed them that Eleanor had left detailed instructions for her funeral arrangements and the disposition of her estate. The reading of Eleanor's will had taken place in Richardson's law office in downtown Washington, with Maya and her parents as the only attendees. Richardson, who had been Eleanor's attorney for over 20 years, explained that Eleanor had been very specific about her wishes for the bookstore and its contents. Maya had expected Eleanor to leave the store to a museum or university, given her lack of children and her passion for books and historical preservation. Instead, Eleanor had left everything to Maya: the 3-story brownstone building, the entire inventory of the Midnight Scholar, and what the will described as all contents, known and unknown, of the premises at 1247 Wisconsin Avenue. The will also included a letter addressed specifically to Maya, written in Eleanor's careful handwriting and sealed in an envelope that Richardson had been instructed to give to Maya after the formal reading. Eleanor's letter had been brief but intriguing. "Maya, you have the knowledge and instincts necessary to understand the true value of what I am leaving to you. The bookstore is only the beginning. Look for what others have missed, and trust your expertise to guide you to discoveries that will honor the memory of those who worked in shadows to protect the light of knowledge. The most important books are not always on the shelves where people expect to find them." The inheritance had been substantial and complicated. The Georgetown building alone was appraised at $2.8 million, reflecting the premium prices for real estate in one of Washington's most desirable neighborhoods. The book inventory had been professionally appraised at $480,000, though Maya suspected that Eleanor's collection of rare and unusual items might be worth considerably more than the conservative appraisal suggested. But the inheritance also came with significant responsibilities and costs. The building required expensive maintenance and updates to meet current commercial building codes. Eleanor had left behind business debts totaling $75,000, mostly to book dealers and suppliers around the world. The property taxes on a Georgetown commercial building were substantial, and Maya would need to generate sufficient income from the bookstore to cover ongoing expenses while completing her doctoral program. Maya had spent the month of October 2024 taking a leave of absence from Columbia to settle Eleanor's affairs and learn the practical aspects of running the Midnight Scholar She had moved into Eleanor's small but comfortable apartment on the third floor of the building. Surrounded by Eleanor's personal library and collection of artifacts from around the world, Russian nesting dolls, German beer steins, French wine, bottles and photographs of Eleanor with people Maya didn't recognize in cities Maya couldn't identify. The bookstore had continued to operate during the transition, with Maya learning to serve Eleanor's loyal customers while gradually understanding the complex systems Eleanor had used to organize and manage her inventory. Eleanor had never used a computer system to track books, relying instead on an intricate card catalog system and her own remarkable memory. Books were organized according to Eleanor's personal system that combined subject matter in what she called historical significance in ways that made perfect sense to Eleanor, but were bewildering to anyone else. Maya's academic background had proved invaluable in understanding Eleanor's organizational philosophy. The store was essentially organized like a research library, with related materials grouped together regardless of their commercial value or publication date. Intelligence-related books were shelved together with government documents and foreign language materials that dealt with similar topics. Literary works were organized by theme and historical period rather than by author's last name. The store's customer base had remained loyal during the transition, though many of Eleanor's longtime customers had expressed concern about whether Maya would maintain Eleanor's standards for quality and authenticity. These customers included Georgetown professors who relied on Eleanor to locate obscure academic materials, government retirees who appreciated her knowledge of historical documents, and foreign diplomats who valued her ability to obtain publications from their home countries. Maya had been surprised to discover that many of Eleanor's customers seemed to know more about the store's inventory than she did. Despite her intensive efforts to understand Eleanor's cataloging system, customers would request specific books or documents and direct Maya to shelves where Eleanor usually kept materials on particular topics. Some customers seemed to have standing arrangements with Eleanor for particular types of books or documents, though Maya found no written records of these arrangements. The financial reality of operating the Midnight Scholar was both challenging and encouraging. The store generated steady revenue from regular customers and occasional sales of valuable items. But the profit margins were slim, and the business required constant attention to inventory, acquisition, and customer service. Maya had calculated that she would need to increase sales by at least 30%. To cover all expenses while paying herself a modest salary, Maya's expertise in intelligence literature had helped her understand why the Midnight Scholar attracted such a sophisticated and specialized clientele. The store's inventory included materials that weren't available in most bookstores: declassified government documents, foreign military manuals, technical publications from various countries, and academic works on intelligence topics that had limited commercial distribution. Eleanor had somehow maintained relationships with suppliers who could provide access to materials that normal book dealers couldn't obtain. The store's location in Georgetown provided access to customers from the intelligence community, diplomatic corps, and academic institutions who had specific needs for historical and technical materials. Maya had begun to realize that the Midnight Scholar served as more than just a bookstore. It was a resource for researchers, government officials, and international visitors who needed access to specialized information that wasn't readily available through normal channels. As Maya settled into her new role as owner of the Midnight Scholar, she felt the weight of continuing Eleanor's legacy while pursuing her own academic and professional goals. The store represented both financial security and a connection to the mysterious woman who had shaped Maya's love of books and learning. But Maya was beginning to suspect that Eleanor had left her more than just a bookstore. She had inherited a puzzle that would require all of her expertise in intelligence literature and document authentication to solve. The building itself seemed to hold secrets that Maya was only beginning to discover. The basement contained thousands of additional books stored in climate-controlled conditions, many of them in foreign languages and dealing with topics that weren't represented in the main store inventory. The second floor housed Eleanor's collection of rare books and manuscripts, some of which Maya couldn't find in any published catalog or bibliography. The third floor apartment where Maya now lived was filled with Eleanor's personal library and mysterious memorabilia from travels that Eleanor had never fully described. Maya Chen, PhD candidate in intelligence literature and accidental bookstore owner, and stood at the beginning of an investigation that would challenge everything she thought. She knew about her great and her inheritance and the true purpose of the Midnight Scholar. Her expertise in Cold War history, document authentication, and intelligence operations would prove essential as she began to uncover secrets that had been hidden. In plain sight for over 40 years, the stage was set for Maya to discover that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but the opportunity to uncover truths that can change everything you thought you knew about the world around you. Eleanor's cryptic letter had hinted at discoveries waiting to be made, and Maya's unique combination of academic expertise and practical experience with rare books and historical documents had prepared her to recognize the significance of whatever secrets the Midnight Scholar might contain. As November arrived in Georgetown, Maya began to notice details about the bookstore that she had overlooked during her childhood visits and her first month as owner. There were subtle inconsistencies in the building's layout that suggested the space had been modified over the years. There were gaps in Eleanor's carefully organized inventory that seemed to indicate missing materials or collections that had been stored elsewhere. Maya's investigation into her inheritance was about to begin in earnest. Driven by her growing conviction that Eleanor had left her clues to discoveries that would honor the memory of people who had worked in shadows to protect the light of knowledge. The most important books Eleanor had written were not always on the shelves where people expected to find them. The first sign that something was amiss at the Midnight Scholar came on a cold Tuesday morning in mid-November, when Maya was conducting her systematic inventory of Eleanor's rare book collection on the second floor. She had been working methodically through Eleanor's card catalog system, cross-referencing each entry with the actual books on the shelves, when she discovered that a significant number of valuable items were simply missing from their designated locations. Maya had approached the inventory process with the same methodical precision she used for her doctoral research. Each morning, she would select a section of Eleanor's card catalog and spend several hours locating the corresponding books, checking their condition, and updating her digital database with current market values. The process was tedious but necessary. Maya needed to understand exactly what she had inherited before she could make informed decisions about the store's future operations. The missing books weren't random titles that might have been sold or misplaced during the transition after Eleanor's death. They were specific high-value items that Eleanor had carefully cataloged and that represented some of the most important pieces in the store's collection. Among the missing items was a first-edition copy of George Orwell's 1984 that Eleanor had acquired in 1962. Valued at approximately $15,000 in current market conditions. Also missing was a signed first edition of John le Carre's The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, worth at least $8,000, and a complete set of the original CIA training manuals from the 1950s that Eleanor had somehow obtained through channels she had never explained to Maya. The CIA training manuals were particularly significant because they weren't supposed to exist in civilian hands. The manuals covered topics including surveillance techniques, communication protocols, and operational security measures that had been classified when they were created, and as far as Maya knew, had never been officially declassified. Eleanor's possession of these materials had always puzzled Maya, but she had assumed that her great-aunt had acquired them through the same mysterious networks that had allowed her to obtain other rare government publications. Maya's initial assumption was that Eleanor might have moved these valuable items to a more secure location before her death, perhaps anticipating that the store would change hands and wanting to protect the most valuable inventory from theft or damage during the transition. It would have been characteristic of Eleanor's careful nature to safeguard the store's most precious items. And Maya began searching for additional storage areas or security arrangements that Eleanor might have established. But as Maya's investigation continued over the next several days, she discovered that the missing books followed a very specific and troubling pattern. Every missing item dealt with intelligence, espionage, or classified government operations. Books on other topics, even those worth significantly more money, remained exactly where Eleanor's catalog indicated they should be. A first edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird worth $25,000 sat in its designated location, as did a signed copy of Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. It's valued at $18,000. But every book related to intelligence topics had vanished. The pattern was so consistent and comprehensive that Maya began to suspect it wasn't accidental or the result of Eleanor's precautionary measures. Someone with extensive knowledge of Eleanor's inventory system had systematically removed specific books, leaving behind items of equal or greater commercial value, but taking only those related to intelligence topics. The removal had been done carefully and professionally, with catalog cards updated to show that the books had been relocated rather than sold, but with no indication of where they had been moved or who had authorized the transfers. Maya's expertise in intelligence literature made her uniquely qualified to recognize the significance of the missing items. The absent books weren't just valuable collectibles sought after by wealthy book enthusiasts. They represented a comprehensive collection of intelligence history that would be invaluable to researchers, collectors, or anyone seeking to understand the operational methods and historical context of American intelligence agencies during the Cold War and beyond. Eleanor had assembled what amounted to a private intelligence library over the course of 4 decades. The collection had included not only published books about intelligence topics, but also government documents, training materials, operational manuals, memoirs by former intelligence officers that weren't widely available to the public. The missing materials represented decades of careful acquisition and represented a resource that would be extremely difficult to replace. Maya calculated that the missing intelligence-related books and documents had a combined value of over $300,000. Based on current market prices for rare books and historical documents, but their research value was far greater than their monetary worth. The missing collection represented one of the most comprehensive private libraries of intelligence literature that Maya had ever encountered, and its systematic removal suggested that someone understood its true significance. The discovery of the missing books prompted Maya to conduct a more thorough examination of the entire building, using the systematic approach she had learned during her academic training. She began measuring rooms and comparing the dimensions to the building's official floor plan, which she had obtained from the Georgetown Planning Office as part of her efforts to understand the property she had inherited. What Maya discovered through her careful measurements was deeply troubling and completely unexpected. There were significant discrepancies between the official floor plan and the actual layout of the building. Discrepancies that suggested substantial modifications had been made to the original structure without being reflected in the public records. The most obvious discrepancy was on the first floor, where the main bookstore was located. According to the official floor plan filed with Georgetown planning authorities, the building was 28 feet wide and 65 feet deep, with a total first-floor area of 1,820 square feet. But when Maya carefully measured the store's interior dimensions, using a professional laser measuring device she had borrowed from a Georgetown University architecture student, she found that the usable retail space was only 1,640 square feet. The missing 180 square feet of space wasn't accounted for by structural elements like support beams or mechanical systems. Maya had carefully measured around all visible structural features, and her calculations indicated that there was substantial space that existed according to the building plans but wasn't accessible through any door or opening that she could identify. The missing space appeared to be located behind the east wall of the store, in an area where Eleanor had installed a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf unit that contained some of her most valuable rare books. The bookshelf was an impressive piece of craftsmanship that appeared to be built into the wall as a permanent fixture. It extended from floor to ceiling and was constructed of dark walnut that matched the building's original woodwork. The shelves held Eleanor's collection of first-edition American literature, including works by authors like F. Scott Fitzgerald, William Faulkner, and J.D. Salinger. The bookshelf had always been one of Maya's favorite features of the store, and she had never questioned its placement or construction. But Maya's measurements revealed that the bookshelf was much thicker than necessary for its apparent function. The shelf unit projected nearly 3 feet into the store's retail space, which was far more than would be required to hold even the largest books in Eleanor's collection. Standard bookshelf construction would require at most 12 to 18 inches of depth, but Eleanor's installation used almost twice that amount of space. Maya's investigation revealed similar discrepancies on the second and third floors of the building. The second floor, which housed Eleanor's office and additional rare book storage, was missing approximately 200 square feet of space behind what appeared to be a solid wall. The missing space was located behind another built-in bookshelf unit that was similar in construction to the one on the first floor. The third-floor apartment where Maya now lived was missing about 150 square feet. Again, in an area behind built-in bookcases that appeared to be decorative features rather than functional storage. The missing space on the third floor was located behind Maya's bedroom wall, in an area that should have provided additional living space or storage for the apartment. The architectural inconsistencies weren't immediately obvious to casual observation, which suggested that whoever had designed and implemented the modifications had considerable expertise in concealing structural changes. Eleanor had been remarkably clever about disguising the alterations to the building's original layout. The built-in bookcases appeared to be decorative features that added character and charm to the historic brownstone in the missing space. Wasn't noticeable unless someone was specifically looking for discrepancies between the official plans and the actual layout. Maya's academic background and intelligence history provided crucial context for understanding what she was discovering. During the Cold War, it had been common for intelligence agencies and their assets to modify buildings to create secure storage areas, safe rooms, or hidden meeting spaces. The techniques for concealing space within existing buildings had been refined by professionals who understood how to make modifications that wouldn't be detected by casual inspection, routine building maintenance, or even professional architectural surveys. The CIA and other intelligence agencies had developed sophisticated methods for creating hidden spaces that could be used to store sensitive documents, conduct clandestine meetings, or house communication equipment. These modifications were typically made to appear as normal architectural features, and they were designed to be accessible only to people who knew the specific mechanisms for opening concealed doors or panels. Maya had studied numerous historical examples of such modifications. During her research into Cold War intelligence operations, safe houses, front businesses, and other facilities used by intelligence agencies routinely included hidden rooms, concealed storage areas, and secret passages that allowed for secure operations and emergency escape routes. Maya was discovering at the Midnight Scholar were consistent with the professional standards and techniques that had been used by intelligence agencies for decades. The more Maya investigated, the more convinced she became that Eleanor had deliberately concealed substantial space within the building for purposes that weren't apparent from the store's normal operations. The missing books, the architectural discrepancies, and Eleanor's mysterious background were beginning to form a pattern that suggested the Midnight Scholar had served purposes far beyond selling books to Georgetown customers. Maya's suspicions were reinforced when she began examining Eleanor's business records more carefully, applying the same analytical skills she used for her academic research to understand the financial operations of the bookstore. Eleanor had maintained meticulous financial records, detailed ledgers documenting every transaction, expense, and source of income. But Maya discovered significant gaps and inconsistencies in the documentation that didn't make sense for her. Someone as organized and careful as Eleanor had been throughout her life, the store's recorded income, as documented in Eleanor's carefully maintained books, wasn't sufficient to cover the building's substantial expenses, Eleanor's comfortable lifestyle, and her frequent international travel. Maya calculated that the bookstore's documented sales revenue would have covered perhaps 60% of Eleanor's known expenses, leaving a substantial gap that had to have been filled by additional sources of income that weren't reflected in the store's official records. Eleanor's personal tax returns, which Maya found in a locked filing cabinet in the second-floor office, showed income levels that were significantly higher than what the bookstore's cash registers and sales records could account for. Eleanor had consistently reported income to the IRS that was 40 to 50%, higher than what the store's documented sales could justify. The discrepancy suggested that Eleanor had been receiving substantial money from sources other than book sales, but there was no documentation in the store's records to explain these additional income streams. Maya also discovered that Eleanor had maintained several bank accounts that weren't used for the bookstore's routine operations. These accounts, which Maya found references to in Eleanor's personal papers, had received regular deposits from sources that were identified only by numeric codes rather than company names or individual identities. The deposits had continued for decades, with amounts that varied considerably but averaged several $1,000s per month and totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. The pattern of deposits was particularly intriguing too. Maya, because of her extensive knowledge of how intelligence agencies had historically funded their operations and maintained relationships with assets and sources. During the Cold War, the CIA had routinely made payments to operatives, informants, and support personnel through front companies, numbered accounts, and other mechanisms designed to obscure the source of funding and protect the identities of people who were working with the agency. The payment patterns in Eleanor's bank records were remarkably consistent with the methods that intelligence agencies had used to fund long-term operations or maintain relationships with valuable sources. The regularity of the payments, the use of coded identifiers instead of company names, and the substantial amounts involved all suggested a professional arrangement rather than casual business relationships or investment income. Maya's investigation into Eleanor's background revealed additional mysteries that deepened her suspicions about her great and sense true activities and the real purpose of the Midnight Scholar. Eleanor's passport, which Maya found in a safety deposit box along with other important documents, showed extensive international travel that wasn't consistent with the schedule or financial resources of someone running a small, independent bookstore. Eleanor had made multiple trips to Europe, Asia, and South America over the course of 4 decades, often staying abroad for several weeks at a time and sometimes making multiple trips to the same countries within a single year. The travel patterns were particularly heavy during the 1960s and 1970s, when Cold War tensions were at their peak and intelligence activities were most intense. The passport stamps revealed that Eleanor had visited countries that were strategically significant in intelligence operations and Cold War competition. She had made frequent trips to West Germany during the height of the Berlin crisis, when the city was a major center for East-West espionage activities. She had visited Vienna repeatedly during the 1960s and 1970s, when the Austrian capital was known as the spy capital of Europe and served as a neutral meeting ground for intelligence operatives from both sides of the Iron Curtain. Eleanor's travel history also included visits to several countries in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War period, trips to South American countries where the United States was supporting anti-communist governments, and journeys to African nations that were battlegrounds in the Cold War competition for influence in the developing world. Eleanor's travel itinerary read like a map of Cold War flashpoints, and the timing of her trips often coincided with major international crises or significant intelligence operations. Maya also discovered a substantial collection of Eleanor's personal correspondence that raised additional questions about her great aunt's connections and activities. Eleanor had maintained correspondence with people around the world, many of whom used only first names or initials in their letters, and who wrote about topics that seemed to involve more than casual friendship or business relationships. The letters often contained references to mutual friends, shared interests, and common concerns that suggested relationships based on professional collaboration or shared missions rather than personal friendship. About historical research projects, efforts to obtain access to government documents, and coordination of activities that seemed to involve multiple people working toward common goals. Some of Eleanor's correspondence wrote in languages other than English, and the content of these letters often dealt with topics related to international politics, historical research, and what appeared to be ongoing projects or investigations. Maya's language skills, developed during her academic training, allowed her to translate some of the letters from German, French, and Russian. The translated letters revealed discussions of historical documents, research into government activities, and coordination of efforts to preserve or share sensitive information. The correspondence suggested that Eleanor had been part of an international network of people who were interested in intelligence history, government accountability, and the preservation of historical information. Some letters referenced efforts to obtain declassified documents through Freedom of Information Act requests, and similar legal mechanisms in other countries. Other letters discussed research into historical operations in coordination with academics, journalists, and other researchers who were working on similar projects. Eleanor appeared to have been a key figure in a community of people who were dedicated to preserving and sharing information about intelligence activities, government operations, and historical events that had been classified or suppressed. The network seemed to include former government employees, academic researchers, journalists, and other civilians who had developed expertise in intelligence topics and who worked together to gather and preserve historical information. Maya's growing suspicions about Eleanor's activities were reinforced when she began to pay closer attention to the store's customer patterns and to observe the behavior of people who visited the Midnight Scholar. She noticed that certain customers seemed to visit the store on regular schedules, often purchasing specific types of materials or requesting books on particular topics that related to intelligence, government operations, or historical research. These regular customers rarely browsed casually through the store's general inventory. Instead, they knew exactly what they wanted and often asked for specific titles or requested materials on particular topics. They seemed familiar with Eleanor's organizational system and often directed Maya to shelves where Eleanor usually kept materials related to their areas of interest. Their knowledge of the store's inventory was often more detailed than Maya's own understanding, despite her intensive efforts to learn Eleanor's cataloging system. Some of these regular customers seemed surprised and concerned by Maya's presence and asked detailed questions about Eleanor's death, the circumstances of the transition, and the disposition of Eleanor's estate. Several customers specifically asked whether Eleanor had left any special instructions for particular customers, or whether there were any additional materials that weren't displayed in the main store areas. The questions suggested that these customers knew about aspects of Eleanor's operations that weren't apparent from the store's normal retail activities. Maya also noticed that some customers seemed disappointed and frustrated when they couldn't find specific items that they expected to be available. These customers would ask for books or documents by exact title or even by catalog numbers, suggesting that they had detailed knowledge of Eleanor's inventory system and had previously been able to obtain specific materials through the store. When Maya couldn't locate the requested items, it's often because they were among the missing intelligence-related books. These customers would often leave quickly without purchasing anything else, as if their visit had a specific purpose that couldn't be fulfilled by browsing the general inventory. The pattern of customer behavior strongly suggested that the Midnight Scholar had served as more than a typical bookstore for at least some of Eleanor's clientele. The store appeared to have functioned as a source for specialized materials that weren't available through normal retail channels, and Eleanor had maintained relationships with customers who had specific needs for intelligence-related information, historical documents, or other materials that required special expertise to obtain and authenticate. Maya's investigation was complicated by the fact that she was also trying to maintain the store's normal operations while learning the business aspects of running an independent bookstore and completing her doctoral dissertation, the daily demands of serving customers, managing inventory, ordering new books, handling financial transactions, maintaining the building left limited time for the detailed investigation that the mysteries surrounding Eleanor's activities seemed to require, but Maya's academic training had taught her to be systematic and thorough in her research, and she began to approach the investigation of Eleanor's secrets with the same methodical approach she used for her dissertation research. She created detailed files documenting the missing books, the architectural discrepancies, the financial irregularities, and the suspicious customer behavior. She photographed and cataloged all of Eleanor's personal papers, correspondence, and business records, creating a comprehensive database that would allow her to identify patterns and connections that might not be obvious from examining individual pieces of evidence. Maya also began researching the history of the building at 1247 Wisconsin Avenue, hoping to find clues about when and why the architectural modifications had been made, and who might have been responsible for the professional quality work that had been required to conceal substantial space within the existing structure. The Georgetown Planning Office had records showing that Eleanor had applied for renovation permits several times during her ownership of the building, But the permits had been for routine maintenance and updates rather than major structural changes that would have required detailed architectural plans and professional oversight. However, Maya discovered that there had been significant renovation work done on the building in 1984. Shortly after Eleanor had purchased the property from the previous owner, the work had been performed by a construction company called Blackstone Renovation Services, which specialized in government and commercial projects rather than typical residential or retail construction. The permits had been approved for interior improvements and security enhancements, but the nature of the security enhancements wasn't specified in the public records. Maya's research into Blackstone Renovation Services revealed that the company had worked extensively on government buildings, facilities that required specialized security features. The firm had experience with projects that involved classified materials, sensitive operations, and clients who required complete discretion about the nature of their work. The company's client list, to the extent that it was available in public records, included several government agencies, defense contractors, and organizations that were known to have connections to the intelligence community. The timing and scope of the 1984 renovation work was entirely consistent with the creation of concealed spaces within the building. The choice of Blackstone Renovation Services suggested that the project had required expertise in security construction and classified facilities. Maya realized that the modifications to Eleanor's building had been planned and executed by professionals who understood the requirements for creating secure, hidden spaces that could pass routine inspection while serving specialized purposes. The more Maya learned about Eleanor's building modifications, financial arrangements, travel patterns, customer relationships, and correspondence networks, the more convinced she became that her Graydon had been involved in activities that went far beyond operating a bookstore. Eleanor appeared to have been part of a sophisticated network of people who were engaged in collecting, preserving, and sharing information related to intelligence operations and government activities. Maya's expertise in intelligence history provided the analytical framework necessary to understand what she was discovering during the Cold War and continuing into the present. There had been extensive networks of academics, journalists, researchers, and other civilians who had worked with intelligence agencies in various capacities. Some had been formal employees or contractors, while others had served as sources analysts or facilitators who helped intelligence agencies accomplish their missions without being directly employed by the government. Eleanor's activity seemed entirely consistent with someone who had served as what intelligence professionals called a support asset, a person who provided services or resources that were valuable to intelligence operations, but who wasn't a formal employee of any agency. Support assets often maintained cover jobs or businesses that provided legitimate reasons for their activities while also serving the needs of intelligence agencies in ways that couldn't be accomplished through official channels. The bookstore would have been an ideal cover for someone who was involved in intelligence-related activities. Bookstores naturally attracted customers who were interested in information and research, and they provided completely legitimate reasons for maintaining extensive files, corresponding with people around the world, and collecting materials that might otherwise seem suspicious. A bookstore owner's need to travel internationally, maintain contacts with suppliers and customers in various countries, and handle rare or sensitive materials would be completely normal and wouldn't attract attention from neighbors, authorities, or anyone else who might be curious about unusual activities. As November progressed and Maya's investigation continued, she became increasingly convinced that Eleanor had left her far more than just a successful bookstore and valuable real estate. The missing books, hidden spaces, mysterious financial arrangements, and suspicious customer behavior all pointed to the existence of secrets that Eleanor had concealed within
The Midnight Scholar
for decades. Maya's unique combination of academic expertise and intelligence, history, and practical experience with rare books and historical documents had prepared her to recognize the significance of what she was discovering. The question that remained was how to find what Eleanor had hidden and what Maya would do with whatever secrets she uncovered. Eleanor's cryptic letter had suggested that Maya had the knowledge and instincts necessary to understand the true value of her inheritance. Had also warned that the most important books were not always on the shelves where people expected to find them. Maya was beginning to realize that solving the mystery of Eleanor's secrets would require more than just academic research and careful observation. She would need to think like an intelligence professional, understanding how information was concealed, protected, and shared by people who had worked in what Eleanor had called the shadows to protect the light of knowledge. The investigation was about to move from passive observation to active exploration. As Maya prepared to search for the hidden spaces that her measurements had revealed, and to look for the missing books that represented the key to understanding Eleanor's true activities, Maya's expertise in intelligence literature and document authentication would be essential as she began to uncover secrets that had been hidden in plain sight for over 40 years. The mysterious anomaly that had begun with missing books was evolving into a comprehensive mystery that challenged everything Maya thought she knew about her grattant and her inheritance. The Midnight Scholar was revealing itself to be far more than a bookstore, and Maya was beginning to understand that Eleanor had left her clues to discoveries that would require all of her expertise and courage to pursue. Maya Chen approached the mysteries surrounding Eleanor's bookstore with the same methodical precision that had made her doctoral research so successful. Her academic training had taught her to test the simplest explanations first, to document every hypothesis, and to avoid jumping to dramatic conclusions without exhausting all rational possibilities. Despite the mounting evidence that something extraordinary was hidden within the Midnight Scholar, Maya was determined to investigate every conventional explanation before accepting that her grattan had been involved in intelligence activities. Her first systematic attempt to solve the mystery of the missing books involved contacting every major rare book dealer, auction house, and private collector on the East Coast. Maya reasoned that if Eleanor had moved the valuable intelligence-related books for safekeeping, she would have used established networks in the rare book trade to ensure their security and proper storage. Maya spent 3 days making phone calls and sending emails to dealers who had done business with Eleanor over the years. The responses she received were both disappointing and puzzling. Every dealer Maya contacted remembered Eleanor as a knowledgeable and reliable colleague who had occasionally sold valuable items and frequently purchased unusual materials. But none of them had recent records of transactions involving the specific books that were missing from the Midnight Scholar's inventory. More troubling, several dealers mentioned that Eleanor had contacted them in the months before her death, asking about secure storage facilities and insurance arrangements for valuable collections, but she had never followed through with any actual storage agreements. Marcus Weinstein from the Strand Bookstore, who had been one of Maya's mentors during her summer employment, was particularly helpful in Maya's investigation. Marcus had maintained a professional relationship with Eleanor for over 20 years, and had occasionally served as an intermediary when Eleanor needed to authenticate or appraise particularly valuable items. Eleanor was always very careful about her most valuable books, Marcus explained during a lengthy phone conversation. She had a climate-controlled storage room in her building and a comprehensive insurance policy that covered her rare book collection. But about 6 months before she died, she started asking questions about off-site storage and whether I knew of any facilities that specialized in, let's call them sensitive materials. I got the impression she was concerned about security, but she never explained why. Marcus's information confirmed Maya's suspicion that Eleanor had been planning to relocate her most valuable books, but it didn't explain where they had gone or who had been responsible for moving them. Maya expanded her investigation to include storage facilities, bank safety deposit boxes, and private security companies that specialized in protecting valuable collections. Maya's search of local storage facilities proved fruitless. None of the climate-controlled storage companies in the Washington area had any record of Eleanor Chen as a customer, and none had received inquiries about storing rare books or historical documents. Maya also checked with several banks about additional safety deposit boxes. But Eleanor's estate attorney had already provided Maya with keys to the single box that Eleanor had maintained at Georgetown First National. The investigation into private security companies was more promising, but ultimately frustrating. Maya discovered that Eleanor had contacted 3 different firms that specialized in protecting valuable collections. but she had requested information about services that went beyond typical residential security. Eleanor had asked about companies that had experience with government-grade security protocols and classified material storage requirements. The requests had been unusual enough that all three companies remembered them, but Eleanor had never contracted for any services. Maya's second major investigation focused on finding a rational explanation for the architectural discrepancies she had discovered. She contacted the Georgetown Historical Preservation Society to research the building's history and to determine whether the concealed spaces might be original features that had been forgotten or overlooked in subsequent renovations. The Historical Society's records revealed that the building at 1247 Wisconsin Avenue had been constructed in 1952 as part of a small development of upscale commercial and residential properties. The original owner had been a businessman named William Hartley, who had operated an import-export business from the ground floor while living in the upper floors. The building had been designed by a local architect and constructed by a standard commercial building company, with no indication of any unusual features or specialized construction requirements. Maya obtained copies of the original architectural plans from the Historical Society and spent several hours comparing them to the current layout of the building. The original plans showed a straightforward commercial design with no concealed spaces, hidden rooms, or unusual structural features. The discrepancies between the original plans and the current layout had definitely been created during subsequent modifications, most likely during the major renovation work that had been done in 1984. Shortly after Eleanor purchased the building, Maya's research into the 1984 renovation became more detailed and systematic. She contacted Blackstone Renovation Services, the company that had performed the work, hoping to obtain copies of the renovation plans, or at least to speak with someone who remembered the project. What she discovered was both enlightening and troubling. Blackstone Renovation Services had been sold to a larger construction conglomerate in 1995, and most of the company's records from the 1980s had been destroyed during the transition. However, Maya was able to speak with Robert Blackstone Jr., son of the company's founder, who remembered the Eleanor Chen project because of its unusual requirements and the complete secrecy that had surrounded the work. That was one of the strangest jobs we ever did, Robert told Maya during a phone interview. The client, your gratant, had very specific requirements about creating concealed storage areas that wouldn't be detectable during routine inspections. She provided detailed specifications that looked like they came from some kind of security manual, and she insisted that all workers sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements before they could work on the project. Robert explained that the renovation had been far more complex and expensive than typical commercial remodeling work. The concealed spaces had required sophisticated engineering to ensure that they wouldn't compromise the building's structural integrity. And the construction had involved specialized materials and techniques that weren't used in normal building projects. The work had to be done in sections, with different crews handling different aspects of the project, Robert continued. No single worker saw the complete scope of what we were building. The client insisted on compartmentalizing the work, so that individual contractors couldn't understand the full purpose of the modifications. It was like working on a classified government project, but the client was supposedly just a bookstore owner. Most significantly, Robert revealed that Eleanor hadn't been the only person involved in planning and overseeing the renovation work. A man who identified himself only as Mr. Harrison had been present during most of the construction meetings and had provided technical specifications for the security features Mr. Harrison had displayed. Detailed knowledge of construction techniques and security protocols that suggested professional expertise in creating concealed facilities. Mr. Harrison definitely wasn't a typical building owner or even a normal contractor, Robert recalled. He knew exactly what he wanted and why. And he understood the technical aspects of the work better than most architects I've worked with. I got the impression that he had experience with this type of specialized construction, but he never explained his background or his relationship to the project. His investigation into the mysterious Mr. Harrison proved frustrating. Robert Blackstone Jr. couldn't provide a full name or contact information for the man, and there was no record of him in any of the renovation permits or contracts. Maya began to suspect that Mr. Harrison had been using a false identity and that his involvement in the project had been deliberately concealed from official records. Maya's third major investigation focused on finding rational explanations for Eleanor's mysterious income sources and the pattern of deposits that had continued for decades. She began by examining Eleanor's tax returns more carefully, looking for information about investment income, business partnerships, or consulting work that might explain the additional revenue streams. Eleanor's tax returns showed that she had consistently reported income from consulting services and historical research in addition to the bookstore's sales revenue. The consulting income had varied considerably from year to year, but had averaged approximately $50,000 annually over the past 2 decades. The historical research income had been more modest but consistent, averaging about $15,000 per year. Combined with the bookstore's profits, these additional income sources could account for Eleanor's comfortable lifestyle and international travel. However, Maya could find no documentation in Eleanor's business records to support the consulting and research income that she had. Reported to the IRS, there were no contracts for consulting work, no records of research projects, and no correspondence with clients who might have been paying for Eleanor's expertise. The income appeared to be legitimate from a tax perspective, but Maya couldn't identify the actual sources of the payments. Maya's investigation into Eleanor's bank records was complicated by privacy laws and the complexity of tracking financial transactions that had occurred over several decades. However, she was able to obtain some information through Eleanor's estate attorney, who had been granted access to Eleanor's financial records as part of settling the estate. The bank records confirmed that Eleanor had received regular deposits from sources identified only by numerical codes. But the banks couldn't or wouldn't provide information about the actual sources of the payments without court orders that Maya wasn't prepared to pursue. The payments had come through wire transfers from banks in various cities, including New York, Washington, Chicago, and several international locations. But the ultimate sources remained hidden behind layers of financial intermediaries. Maya consulted with a forensic accountant who specialized in investigating complex financial arrangements. The accountant, Dr. Patricia Wells, reviewed Eleanor's available financial records and concluded that the payment patterns were consistent with legitimate consulting or research work, but that the level of confidentiality and the use of intermediary financial institutions suggested clients who required complete discretion about their business relationships. This type of payment structure is often used by government agencies, large corporations, or other organizations that need to maintain confidentiality about their consulting relationships, Dr. Wells explained. The payments are structured to be completely legal and reportable for tax purposes, but the actual identity of the clients is protected through legitimate financial privacy mechanisms. Dr. Wells also noted that the consistency and longevity of the payments suggested long-term relationships with clients who valued Eleanor's services highly enough to maintain financial arrangements for decades. The payment amounts and schedules indicated that Eleanor had been providing specialized services that were difficult to replace, and that justified premium compensation. Maya's fourth major investigation involved attempting to find rationale, explanations for Eleanor's extensive international travel, and her connections with the network of correspondents who had written to her about intelligence and historical topics. Maya approached this investigation by researching legitimate academic and professional organizations that focused on intelligence, history, and government transparency. Maya discovered that there were indeed several academic conferences, research organizations, and professional associations that brought together historians, researchers, and former government employees who studied intelligence topics. Eleanor could have been involved with these organizations as an independent researcher or as someone who provided specialized services to academic institutions and research projects. The International Association for Intelligence Education held annual conferences that attracted historians, former intelligence officers, and researchers from around the world. The Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training sponsored research projects and maintained archives related to government history and international relations. The Cold War International History Project, based at the Woodrow Wilson Center, coordinated research efforts involving scholars from multiple countries who studied declassified documents and government activities. Maya contacted several of these organizations to inquire about Eleanor's potential involvement in their activities. The responses were mixed, but generally unhelpful. Some organizations had records of Eleanor Chen as a conference attendee or occasional contributor to their publications, but none had comprehensive information about her activities or the scope of her involvement in their work. Dr. James Peterson, who directed the Cold War International History Project, remembered Eleanor as a knowledgeable and well-connected researcher who had occasionally provided valuable documents and insights for historical research projects. However, he acknowledged that Eleanor had always been somewhat secretive about her sources and methods for obtaining rare documents and information. Eleanor was one of those people who seemed to have access to materials that other researchers couldn't find. Dr. Peterson explained during a phone conversation with Maya. She would show up at conferences with documents or books that weren't supposed to exist in private hands. She could provide insights into historical events that suggested access to information that hadn't been publicly released. We always assumed she had developed relationships with former government employees or had found ways to obtain materials through legitimate channels. But she never explained her methods in detail. Maya's investigation into academic organizations revealed that Eleanor had been part of a loosely organized network of researchers who shared information and collaborated on projects related to intelligence history. However, the level of coordination and the international scope of Eleanor's activities seemed to exceed what would be typical for normal academic collaboration. Maya's fifth investigation focused on testing the possibility that Eleanor's unusual activities had been related to completely legitimate business or collecting activities that had been conducted with unusual secrecy for personal or professional reasons. Maya researched the rare book trade's practices regarding privacy, confidentiality, and the protection of client identities. She discovered that high-end rare book dealers did indeed maintain strict confidentiality about their clients and transactions, particularly when dealing with government officials, celebrities, or other public figures who preferred to keep their collecting activities private. Some collectors used intermediaries, false names, or complex financial arrangements to protect their privacy when purchasing controversial or sensitive materials. Maya also learned that there was a substantial market for intelligence-related books and documents among private collectors, military historians, and former government employees who were interested in preserving historical materials. Some collectors specialize in obtaining declassified documents, training materials, and other government publications that had historical value but weren't widely available to the public. However, Maya's research also revealed that the legitimate rare book trade had established procedures and documentation requirements that would have left more comprehensive records than what she had found in Eleanor's files. Professional dealers maintained detailed records of their transactions, and they typically worked with established networks of suppliers and customers whose identities were known even if they weren't publicly disclosed.
Eleanor's activities seemed
to exceed the normal boundaries of even the most secretive aspects of the rare book trade. The systematic removal of specific books, the architectural modifications to create hidden spaces, and the long-term financial arrangements with unidentified clients suggested activities that went beyond commercial book dealing, academic research, or private collecting. Maya's sixth and most systematic investigation involved attempting to contact the mysterious customers who had visited the Midnight Scholar looking for specific materials that were no longer available. Maya began keeping detailed records of every month. A customer who asked for intelligence-related books or who seemed disappointed by the changes in the store's inventory since Eleanor's death. Over the course of 2 weeks, Maya encountered 12 customers who fit this pattern. She carefully documented their requests, their apparent familiarity with Eleanor's inventory system, and their reactions when told that specific materials were no longer available. Maya also attempted to engage these customers in conversations about their relationship with Eleanor and their interest in the missing materials. The results of this investigation were both revealing and frustrating. Most of the customers were reluctant to discuss their previous arrangements with Eleanor in any detail, and several seemed genuinely concerned about Maya's questions and her level of knowledge about Eleanor's activities. A few customers provided cryptic hints about Eleanor's special services or her access to unique materials, but none were willing to explain these references in detail. One customer, an elderly man who identified himself only as Professor Williams, was more forthcoming than the others. He explained that Eleanor had been known among certain circles as someone who could locate and authenticate historical documents that weren't available through normal channels. Professor Williams had been working on a book about intelligence operations during the Berlin crisis, and Eleanor had provided him with several rare documents that had been essential to his research. Eleanor had connections that the rest of us didn't understand, Professor Williams told Maya. She could find documents that had supposedly been destroyed, and she could authenticate materials that other experts couldn't verify. Some of us suspected that she had relationships with former intelligence officers or government archivists who were willing to share materials unofficially, but she never explained her sources. Professor Williams also revealed that Eleanor had hosted informal gatherings at the bookstore where researchers, former government employees, and other interested parties would meet to share information and discuss historical topics. These gatherings had been invitational affairs that weren't advertised or documented, and they had attracted people from the intelligence community who were interested in preserving historical information and sharing their experiences with trusted researchers. Maya's investigation into Eleanor's activities was producing a consistent pattern of evidence that pointed toward involvement in intelligence-related activities. But every rational explanation she tested proved inadequate. To fully account for what she was discovering, the missing books, hidden spaces, mysterious income sources, international travel, networks of secretive customers all suggested activities that exceeded normal business, academic, or collecting activities. Maya's academic training and natural skepticism continued to push her toward finding conventional explanations for Eleanor's secrets. She researched additional possibilities, including inheritance of valuable materials from Eleanor's family, involvement in legal disputes that required secrecy, participation in government declassification projects in collaboration with law enforcement agencies on historical investigations. None of these possibilities adequately explained the full scope of what Maya was discovering. Eleanor's activities had been too systematic, too professional, and too well-funded to be explained by casual involvement in academic research or book collecting. The architectural modifications had been too sophisticated and expensive to be justified by normal security concerns for a bookstore. The financial arrangements had been too complex and long-term to be explained by occasional consulting work or book sales. Maya also considered the possibility that Eleanor had been involved in some form of illegal activity, such as smuggling rare books, evading taxes, or participating in black market transactions. However, this possibility was contradicted by Eleanor's meticulous record-keeping, her legitimate tax filings, and her reputation in the academic and rare book communities. Eleanor's activities had been secretive, but apparently legal, sophisticated, but apparently legitimate. As Maya's systematic investigation of rational explanations continued, she became increasingly convinced that Eleanor had been involved in activities that were related to intelligence or government work, but that had been conducted through unofficial channels or private arrangements. Eleanor appeared to have been what intelligence professionals called a support asset, someone who provided services or resources to intelligence agencies or government organizations without being a formal employee. Maya's expertise in intelligence history provided the context necessary to understand how such arrangements worked. During the Cold War and continuing into the present, intelligence agencies had routinely worked with civilians who could provide specialized services, access to unique resources, or expertise that wasn't available within government organizations. These relationships were often informal and were designed to provide plausible deniability for both the agencies and the individuals involved. A bookstore owner with expertise in rare documents and international connections would have been an ideal support asset for intelligence agencies that needed access to historical materials. authentication of documents, or secure storage for sensitive information. Eleanor's international travel, her financial resources, and her networks of contacts would have made her valuable to agencies that needed unofficial assistance with research, document acquisition, or information sharing. Maya's investigation was reaching the point where rational explanations were becoming insufficient to account for the evidence she had accumulated. The mysteries surrounding Eleanor's activities were too complex and too systematic to be explained by normal business operations, academic research, or personal collecting interests. Maya was being forced to consider the possibility that her Grattan had indeed been involved in intelligence-related activities, and that the Midnight Scholar had served as more than just a bookstore. The logical next step in Maya's investigation would be to search for the hidden spaces that her architectural measurements had revealed, and to look for the missing books that represented the key to understanding Eleanor's true activities. Maya had exhausted the rational explanations for Eleanor's secrets, and she was ready to begin the active exploration that would either confirm or disprove her growing suspicions about her inheritance. Maya's systematic approach to investigating Eleanor's mysteries had been thorough and professional, but it had also been frustrating and ultimately inconclusive. Every rational explanation she had tested had proven inadequate to fully account for the evidence she had discovered. Maya was beginning to understand that solving the mystery of Eleanor's secrets would require her to move beyond passive investigation and to begin actively searching for the hidden truth that Eleanor had concealed within the Midnight Scholar. The stage was set for Maya to take the decisive step from investigation to exploration, from hypothesis to discovery. Her expertise in intelligence literature and document authentication had prepared her to recognize the significance of whatever she might find, and her systematic approach to research had provided her with the foundation necessary to understand Eleanor's activities in their proper historical context. Maya Chen was about to discover that sometimes the most important answers can only be found by having the courage to look in places where others fear to search, and that the most valuable secrets are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right knowledge and determination to uncover them. Maya's systematic investigation of rational explanations had reached its limits, but her academic training demanded professional validation before proceeding with more invasive exploration. She needed expert confirmation that her discoveries warranted the dramatic step of actively searching for hidden spaces within the building. Her first call was to Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic archaeologist at Georgetown University, specialized in historical site investigation and had extensive experience working with government agencies on sensitive projects. Dr. Foster arrived at the Midnight Scholar on a gray December morning, bringing sophisticated ground-penetrating radar equipment and a graduate student assistant named David Park. Maya had explained her discoveries in general terms, emphasizing the architectural discrepancies and her need for professional confirmation of the hidden spaces before proceeding with any exploration. "Ms. Chen, what you're describing is definitely worth investigating," Dr. Foster said as she examined Maya's measurements and floor plan comparisons. These types of architectural modifications were common during the Cold War period, and the professional quality of the construction work suggests that whoever planned these concealed spaces had significant expertise and resources. Dr. Foster's ground-penetrating radar survey confirmed Maya's measurements with shocking precision. The equipment revealed not only the concealed spaces that Maya had calculated, but also additional details about their construction and contents. The hidden areas contained what appeared to be furniture, filing cabinets, and substantial amounts of material that showed up as dense, organized masses on the radar display. "These aren't empty storage spaces," Dr. Foster explained as she reviewed the radar data. "There are definitely substantial contents in these concealed areas. The organization suggests careful planning rather than random storage. The spaces appear to be climate-controlled and professionally constructed, which indicates significant investment and long-term planning." Most significantly, Dr. Foster's equipment detected what appeared to be a sophisticated access mechanism built into the bookshelf on the first floor. The radar showed a complex mechanical system involving counterweights, hinges, and what looked like an electronic locking mechanism that would allow the entire bookshelf unit to pivot or slide away. from the wall. "This is remarkable engineering," Dr. Foster told Maya. "Whoever designed this access system understood both security and concealment. The mechanism is built to support the weight of the books while still allowing the entire unit to move. And there are backup systems that would allow manual operation if the electronic components failed." Dr. Foster's validation gave Maya the professional confirmation she needed to proceed with active exploration. But it also raised new questions about the legal and ethical implications of what she might discover. Dr. Foster recommended that Maya contact federal authorities before attempting to access the hidden spaces, particularly given the possibility that they might contain classified materials or other sensitive information. Maya's decision to contact federal authorities proved to be both wise and transformative. Her call to the FBI's Washington field office was transferred to Agent Sarah Rodriguez, specialized in historical document recovery and had extensive experience with cases involving classified materials discovered in civilian hands. Agent Rodriguez arrived at the Midnight Scholar within hours of Maya's call, accompanied by a technical specialist who carried equipment that made Dr. Foster's ground-penetrating radar look primitive. Agent Rodriguez explained that the FBI maintained a specialized unit that dealt with discoveries of lost or stolen government documents that Maya's description of Eleanor's activities had triggered. "Protocols for investigating potential intelligence-related materials. Ms. Chen, based on what you've described, there's a strong possibility that your grade-in was involved in what we call historical preservation activities related to intelligence operations," Agent Rodriguez explained. During and after the Cold War, there were numerous unofficial arrangements between intelligence agencies and civilians, who helped preserve important documents and information that might otherwise have been lost or destroyed. Agent Rodriguez's technical specialist, Dr. Michael Torres, conducted a more sophisticated survey of the hidden spaces using equipment that could penetrate deeper into the concealed areas and provide detailed analysis of their contents. What he discovered exceeded everyone's expectations. "We're looking at 3 separate concealed spaces, each with different purposes and different types of contents," Dr. Torres reported. "The first-floor space appears to contain filing systems, with thousands of documents organized in professional archive storage. The second-floor space contains what looks like communications equipment and document processing machinery. The third-floor space appears to be a secure meeting room with specialized furniture and recording equipment. Most remarkably, Dr. Torres's equipment detected clear signatures of precious metals and currency within the first-floor hidden space. The metallic signatures were consistent with gold and silver, and the organized arrangement suggested coins, bars, or other valuable items that had been carefully stored and cataloged." "Miss Chen, we need to proceed very carefully here," Agent Rodriguez told Maya. "What we're detecting suggests that your gradient may have been involved in preserving not only documents, but also valuable materials that were related to intelligence operations. This could include operational funds, payment systems for assets, or other financial resources that were maintained outside normal government channels." Agent Rodriguez explained that the FBI would need to coordinate with other agencies, including the CIA, NSA, and Treasury Department, before attempting to access the concealed spaces. The potential presence of classified documents and valuable materials required specialized handling procedures and security, protocols that went beyond normal law enforcement activities. While waiting for federal agencies to coordinate their approach, Maya used her academic expertise to research Eleanor's activities within the broader context of Cold War intelligence operations. Her investigation into declassified documents and historical records revealed that Eleanor's pattern of activities was consistent with a highly classified program called Operation Bookworm that had been conducted by the CIA from 1962 to 1991. Operation Bookworm had been designed to create a network of civilian assets who could preserve, authenticate, and distribute intelligence-related documents and materials that needed to be kept outside official government channels. The operation had involved bookstore owners, librarians, university professors, and other civilians who had access to documents and the expertise necessary to understand their significance. Maya discovered references to Operation Bookworm in congressional testimony from the 1990s Church Committee investigations, but most details of the operation remained classified. However, the declassified portions of the testimony revealed that the operation had been considered one of the CIA's most successful long-term intelligence preservation programs, and that it had involved substantial financial resources and sophisticated operational security. The historical research also revealed that many Operation Bookworm assets had been provided with secure storage facilities, communication systems, and financial support that allowed them to maintain their cover activities. While serving intelligence functions, the assets had been trained in document authentication, secure storage procedures, and methods for transferring sensitive materials without detection. Maya's research into Eleanor's travel patterns and correspondence revealed that her great-aunt's activities matched the operational profile of a senior Bookworm asset. Eleanor's trips to European intelligence centers, her contacts with international researchers, and her access to rare documents all suggested that she had been part of a sophisticated network designed to preserve intelligence, history, and maintain relationships with former operatives and government officials. Most significantly, Maya discovered that Operation Bookworm sets had been provided with substantial resources for acquiring and preserving valuable materials that might be needed for future intelligence operations. The operation had involved not only documents, but also operational funds, precious metals, and other resources that could be used to support intelligence activities or to compensate assets and sources who had provided valuable services. The federal investigation of the Midnight Scholar became a major intelligence operation involving the FBI, CIA, Treasury Department, and National Archives. Agent Rodriguez coordinated a team of specialists who brought sophisticated equipment and extensive experience with historical intelligence discoveries. The team included Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the CIA's Historical Review Board, Treasury Agent Michael Chang, who specialized in recovered government assets, and National Archives specialist Dr. Robert Kim, who was expert in authentication and preservation of classified documents. The investigation was conducted under strict security protocols, with the bookstore closed to the public and the surrounding area monitored by federal security personnel. The team's initial survey revealed that the concealed spaces were even more sophisticated than previous investigations had suggested. The hidden areas included climate control systems, fire suppression equipment, security systems that had been maintained and updated over decades of operation. The construction quality and technical sophistication indicated that the facilities had been designed and built with unlimited resources and professional expertise. Spula, Ms. Chen, what your graduate created here represents one of the most sophisticated private intelligence preservation facilities we've ever encountered, Dr. Walsh explained. The level of security, the quality of the storage systems, and the scope of the materials suggest that this facility was designed to serve as a critical backup for important intelligence resources that couldn't be stored in official government facilities. The federal team's investigation also revealed that the Midnight Scholar had been equipped with sophisticated communication systems that had allowed Eleanor to maintain secure contact with intelligence agencies and other Bookworm assets around the world. The communication equipment was hidden within what appeared to be normal bookstore fixtures and had been regularly updated with the latest encryption and security technology. Most remarkably, the investigation revealed that Eleanor had been operating under the direct supervision of a CIA officer who used the cover identity Mr. Harrison, the same mysterious figure who had supervised the 1984 renovation work. Mr. Harrison's real identity was revealed to be CIA Senior Officer Thomas Blackwood, Outsey, who had managed the Bookworm operation for over 20 years and had been responsible for Eleanor's recruitment and training. The discovery that Eleanor had been a key asset in a major CIA operation transformed Maya's situation from a personal inheritance matter into a case of national security significance. The federal investigation expanded to include CIA security personnel, National Security Agency analysts, and senior officials from multiple intelligence agencies. CIA Officer Blackwood, now retired but called back to active consultation, met with Maya to explain Eleanor's role in Operation Bookworm and the significance of the materials that had been preserved at the Midnight Scholar. The meeting took place in a secure facility at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, with Maya, accompanied by her attorney and federal security personnel. Ms. Chen, your grattant was one of our most valuable and trusted assets for nearly 30 years, officer, Blackwood explained. Eleanor volunteered for Operation Bookworm in 1962. After her brother, your grandfather, was killed while working for military intelligence in Vietnam. She wanted to honor his memory by helping to preserve the intelligence history that he had died protecting. Blackwood revealed that Eleanor had been extensively trained in intelligence procedures, document authentication, secure communications, and operational security. She had been provided with substantial financial resources and had been authorized to acquire and preserve materials that were critical to ongoing intelligence operations. But that couldn't be stored in official government facilities for security or political reasons. The Midnight Scholar was designed to serve as a backup preservation facility for materials that were too sensitive or too valuable to be stored in normal government archives, Blackwood continued. Eleanor was responsible for maintaining documents related to operations that might be needed for future reference, for preserving resources that could be used to support ongoing missions, and for maintaining relationships with former assets and sources who might provide valuable information or assistance. Most significantly, Blackwood revealed that Eleanor had been authorized to preserve substantial financial resources that had been set aside for intelligence operations that might be needed in the future. These resources included precious metals, foreign currency, and other valuable materials that could be used to fund operations or compensate assets, without leaving traces that could be detected by hostile intelligence services. The Federal Investigation Team worked for 3 weeks to develop security protocols for accessing the concealed spaces without compromising the integrity of the materials or exposing classified information to unauthorized personnel. The operation involved extensive planning, specialized equipment, and coordination between multiple agencies that rarely worked together on such projects. On a cold morning in late December, Maya watched as federal specialists prepared to access the hidden space behind the first-floor bookshelf. The operation was conducted with the precision of a military exercise, with each team member assigned specific responsibilities and security protocols that ensured complete control over the discovery process. Dr. Torres located the electronic access mechanism built into the bookshelf and activated the system. Using codes that had been found in Eleanor's personal papers, the massive bookshelf unit, weighing over 2 tons with its collection of rare books, silently pivoted away from the wall on precisely engineered hinges, revealing a doorway that led into Eleanor's secret world. The hidden room was larger than anyone had expected, extending nearly 20 feet into the space that officially didn't exist. The room was lined with filing cabinets, document storage systems, and preservation equipment that represented decades of careful planning and substantial financial investment. The air was climate-controlled and filtered, and the lighting system was designed to prevent damage to sensitive documents and materials. But what immediately caught everyone's attention was a large vault built into the far wall of the hidden room. The vault was a professional-grade security installation that would have been appropriate for a bank or government facility, and it was equipped with multiple locking systems and security features that indicated extremely valuable contents. Maya's first glimpse into Eleanor's secret world was overwhelming. The hidden room contained thousands of documents organized in professional archive systems, with detailed cataloging systems that indicated precise organization and regular maintenance. The documents appeared to span decades of intelligence operations, with materials in multiple languages and from various countries and agencies. Ms. Chen, this represents one of the most comprehensive private intelligence archives ever discovered, Dr. Walsh told Maya as the team began their preliminary examination of the room's contents. Your gray tant appears to have preserved materials related to major intelligence operations spanning for decades of American intelligence history. The team's initial survey revealed documents related to operations in Europe, Asia, South America, and Africa. The materials included operational plans, asset lists, communication records, and financial documentation that provided unprecedented insight into intelligence activities that had been classified for decades. Many of the documents bore classification, markings that indicated their extreme sensitivity and historical importance. The opening of Eleanor's vault required specialized equipment and techniques that took federal specialists 2 days to complete safely. When the massive vault door finally swung open, Maya found herself looking at a treasure that exceeded her wildest imagination and validated every aspect of her investigation into Eleanor's mysterious activities. The vault contained row upon row of precious metals, organized with the same meticulous care that Eleanor had applied to her book collection. Gold bars stamped with U.S. Treasury markings filled multiple shelves, each bar carefully cataloged with acquisition dates and operational references. Silver coins from various countries were organized in professional numismatic storage systems, with detailed documentation of their origins and significance. But the vault's contents went far beyond precious metals. A foreign currency from dozens of countries was stored in climate-controlled containers, representing operational funds that had been preserved for future intelligence activities. Rare gems and jewelry filled secure storage boxes, each item documented with photographs and provenance information that indicated its acquisition through intelligence operations. Treasury Agent Chang conducted a preliminary valuation of the vault's contents and announced that the materials had a current value of over $15 million. The precious metals alone were worth approximately $12 million, while the foreign currency and other valuable items added several million more to the total. Maya had inherited one of the most valuable private collections of intelligence-related assets ever assembled. Ms. Chen. These materials represent operational resources that were preserved for future intelligence activities that might require funding outside normal government channels. Officer Blackwood explained as the team cataloged the vault's contents. Your great-aunt was responsible for maintaining these resources and ensuring they would be available for future operations or for compensating assets and sources who had provided valuable services over decades of intelligence operations. But the most remarkable discovery came when Dr. Kim opened a series of sealed containers that contained what appeared to be historical documents of extraordinary significance. The containers held original documentation of major intelligence operations, including materials related to the Berlin airlift, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and numerous other critical events in Cold War history. Among the most valuable documents were complete files related to Operation Bookworm itself, including lists of assets, operational procedures, and financial records that provided comprehensive documentation of one of the CIA's most successful long-term operations. The files revealed that Eleanor had been one of over 200 civilians worldwide who had participated in the operation, and that the network had preserved materials and resources worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Most significantly for Maya, the documents included detailed records of Eleanor's activities and accomplishments as a bookworm asset. Eleanor had been responsible for preserving materials related to over 150 different intelligence operations, had maintained secure communications with assets and sources in 45 countries, and had been personally commended by 5 different CIA directors for her exceptional service to American intelligence. The federal government's response to Maya's discovery was swift and generous. Within weeks of the vault's opening, Maya found herself in negotiations with multiple government agencies about the disposition of the materials and her compensation for their recovery. The negotiations were conducted by a team of government attorneys who had extensive experience with similar cases involving civilian discoveries of intelligence-related assets. Under federal law and established precedents for civilian discoveries of government materials, Maya was entitled to substantial compensation for her role in locating and preserving the intelligence resources that Eleanor had maintained for decades. The government's initial offer was $4.2 million, representing 28% of the total value of the recovered materials, plus additional compensation for the ongoing preservation services that Maya might provide. But Maya's negotiations were complicated. By her desire to honor Eleanor's legacy, and to ensure that her great aunt's contributions to American intelligence were properly recognized. Maya insisted that any agreement include provisions for preserving Eleanor's memory, establishing educational programs about civilian contributions to intelligence operations, and creating systems for ongoing historical research into Operation Bookworm and similar programs. The final agreement awarded Maya $5.8 million in compensation, plus ownership of the Midnight Scholar building, and the right to continue operating the bookstore with certain modifications to accommodate its historical significance. The government also agreed to fund a research center at Georgetown University that would study civilian contributions to intelligence operations and would be named the Eleanor Chen Center for Intelligence History. Maya's financial transformation was dramatic, but not as significant as the changes in her understanding of her family history and her own place in American intelligence legacy. She learned that her grandfather Thomas had indeed been killed while working for military intelligence in Vietnam, and that Eleanor's recruitment for Operation Bookworm had been motivated by her desire to honor his sacrifice and continue his service to the country. The discovery also transformed Maya's academic career. Her doctoral dissertation was expanded to include her discoveries at the Midnight Scholar. The resulting work was immediately recognized as a groundbreaking contribution to intelligence history. Maya was offered academic positions at Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown, along with opportunities to work with government agencies on historical preservation projects. Most importantly, Maya's discovery led to the declassification and public release of substantial information about Operation Bookworm and similar programs that had involved civilian contributions to intelligence operations. The revelations provided new understanding of how intelligence agencies had worked with private citizens to preserve important information and resources, and they honored the memory of hundreds of Americans who had served their country in classified roles that had never been publicly recognized. 6 months after the discovery, Maya Chen stood in the renovated Midnight Scholar, which had been transformed into both a working bookstore and a memorial to Eleanor's extraordinary life of service. The store's main floor continued to operate as a bookstore, but it now included a small museum area that told the story of Operation Bookworm and honored the civilian assets who had contributed to American intelligence operations. The hidden room behind the bookshelf had been preserved as a historical exhibit, with Eleanor's filing systems and preservation equipment displayed to show visitors how intelligence materials had been maintained outside official government channels. The room served as a powerful reminder that the most important contributions to national security often came from ordinary citizens who had the courage to serve in extraordinary ways. Maya had established the Eleanor Chen Foundation for Intelligence History, which provided funding for research into civilian contributions to intelligence operations and supported educational programs that taught young people about the importance of preserving historical information. The Foundation's first major project was a comprehensive study of Operation Bookworm that would document the contributions of all the civilian assets who had participated in the program. My grandaunt taught me that the most important secrets are often hidden in plain sight. It's waiting for someone with the knowledge and courage to discover them, Maya said during the dedication ceremony for the Eleanor Chen Center. Eleanor spent 30 years preserving information and resources that she believed would be important for future generations, and she did it without any expectation of recognition or reward. Maya's experience had taught her that ordinary people could make extraordinary contributions to their country's security and to the preservation of historical truth. Eleanor's story demonstrated that intelligence operations often depended on civilians who were willing to serve in roles that would never be publicly acknowledged, and that the most valuable contributions often came from people who had the expertise and dedication to preserve important information for future use. The bookstore continued to attract customers who were interested in intelligence, history, and government transparency, but it now served a broader educational purpose. School groups visited to learn about Cold War history. University researchers came to study the preserved documents, and former intelligence officers brought their families to see a memorial to the civilian assets who had served alongside them. Maya had learned that her inheritance represented much more than money or property. Eleanor had left her a legacy of service, a commitment to preserving historical truth, and an understanding of how ordinary citizens could contribute to extraordinary causes. The discovery had changed Maya's life in ways that went far beyond financial security, providing her with a sense of purpose and a connection to American history that would guide her future career and personal choices. The most valuable discoveries often come from paying attention to details that others overlook and having the courage to investigate things that don't quite make sense. Maya explained to visitors who toured the memorial exhibit. Spent decades preserving materials that she believed would be important someday. And she trusted that eventually someone would have the knowledge and determination to discover what she had preserved. Maya's story had become an inspiration to researchers, students, and ordinary citizens who understood that the most important contributions to society often came from people who were willing to ask difficult questions and pursue investigations that others might ignore. Eleanor's legacy lived on through the research center, the foundation, and the countless people who learned from her example of quiet service and dedication to preserving important truths. The Midnight Scholar remained open as a bookstore, but it had become something much more significant, a memorial to the ordinary Americans who had served their country in extraordinary ways, a research center for intelligence history, and a reminder that the most valuable secrets were often preserved by people who understood that knowledge was too important to be lost to history. Maya Chen had discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't gold or money, but the opportunity to honor the memory of people who served in silence and to ensure that their contributions to history would never be forgotten. Eleanor's gift to Maya had been the chance to uncover truths that changed everything she thought she knew about her family, her country, and the power of ordinary people to preserve extraordinary legacies. 2 years after the discovery, Maya received a call that reminded her that Eleanor's legacy might hold even more secrets. Dr. Kim from the National Archives contacted her to report that analysis of Eleanor's documents had revealed references to other Bookworm facilities that had never been located. The references suggested that Eleanor had been part of a network of preservation sites, and that there might be similar discoveries waiting to be made at other locations around the country. Miss Chen, your Grattan's documents indicate that Operation Bookworm involved at least 12 major preservation facilities, and we've only located 3 of them, Dr. Kim explained. Eleanor appears to have been the coordinator for the entire network, and her files contain clues that might help us locate the other sites and the materials they contain. Maya realized that her discovery at the Midnight Scholar might be just the beginning of a larger investigation into one of the most successful intelligence preservation operations in American history. Eleanor's legacy would continue to reveal new secrets and provide new opportunities for understanding how ordinary citizens had contributed to preserving the most important chapters of American intelligence history. The young woman who had inherited a bookstore had become the guardian of secrets that would continue to educate and inspire future generations. Maya's story proved that the most extraordinary discoveries often began with the simplest observation. When something doesn't quite make sense, it's worth investigating further. And sometimes, if you have the knowledge and courage to pursue the truth, you might discover that the most valuable treasures have been waiting patiently for someone just like you to find them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.